my channel, or welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing my July wrap up. We're going to ignore my wrinkly shirt because I don't fold laundry right out of the dryer and I don't want to iron it, so it is what it is. Let me pull up my stats here. So in the month of July I read 13 books. That's the most books I've ever read in a single month. I had a fantastic reading month and I'm really happy with all the books that I chose to read. So those 13 books were a total of 4,767 pages read for an average total of 154 pages read per day. I read 8 female authors, 2 male authors, some male authors I've read multiple times. I had 5 5-star reads, 5 4-star reads, 2 3.5-star reads, and 1 3-star read. I'm just gonna go in the order that I read the books, not least favorite to favorite or anything like that. The first book I read this month was Survive the Night by Riley Sager. This was my first Riley Sager read and I really enjoyed it. I gave this book 5 stars. I like that this book takes place all in one night. I think that really adds to the suspense of this book. This book follows Charlie and she's trying to go home for the holidays from college and she needs a ride. So she goes to the ride service at the university and meets this guy named Josh who is going to be driving her where she needs to go. And the reason why she is leaving to go home for the holidays a little bit early is because her roommate was actually murdered. And her roommate is one of 3 girls murdered over a 4-year span, I believe, 4 or 5 year span. And Charlie feels like her friend being murdered is her fault because she left her at the bar by herself because they got in a fight, I believe. It's been a minute since I've read this book, so I'm just trying to refresh my memory. While Charlie is in the car with Josh, she really feels like Josh is the murderer. After she thinks she's in the car with the serial killer, we go hour by hour into what events take place. And even though it happens in, I believe, a little over 24 hours, or maybe less than 24 hours, but even though it only takes place with a span of a couple hours, a lot happens in this book and it kept me on my toes and I just really enjoyed this book, so I gave it 5 stars. The next book I read was Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I feel like this book is super hyped up and I gave this book 3 stars. I just felt like it wasn't her best work. I only had the 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo to go off of. But I've heard a lot of people say that this is not her best work, but then I've also heard a lot of people say that they really enjoyed the story. So I don't know. I felt like this book had a lot of potential and it just kind of flopped. This book follows the 4 kids of McReva, which is one of Evelyn Hugo's 7 husbands. So I really like that those stories were kind of mixed in. I felt like there was a lot of characters in this book and it was really hard to keep up with all of them and feel for any of them. Like, I kind of felt for Nina and Jay, but all the others I couldn't really feel for. Like, I couldn't really feel for Kit or Hud because I feel like they weren't in the story a lot, even though they're 2 of his 4 kids. Then we had all the people that the 4 kids knew, and then we had the parents, and it was a lot, and I just didn't really care for it. I gave this book 3 stars. The next book I read, you guys will be proud of me because July was its 3rd month on my TBR, and I finally got to it, and that is Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reid. This book was fine. I was expecting more. I gave it 3.5 stars. It was kind of boring and I also didn't care for the way that the lingo or the conversing of the black characters. I didn't really care for that. I know it's written by a black author, but still I just didn't care for the way that the writing was, and I did listen to this on audiobook, so I think that played a part in it, but I just didn't really care for that and I kind of lost interest, so I gave it 3.5 stars. The next book I read is The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. This book was fine. It was kind of gross in some parts. Like, I literally thought I was gonna start profusely vomiting during the rat scene. Like, it was super descriptive and it was disgusting. But overall, I liked the writing. I thought the story was fine. I gave it 4 stars. I mean, it wasn't the best book I've ever read, but it wasn't terrible. So there's not really much to say about this book other than the fact that like a bunch of southern ladies get together for a book club. Their neighbor they think is a vampire, yada yada. Anyways, it's one of those stories that I went into it blindly, not knowing much about it, because it makes reading it more fun, and I highly suggest doing that with this book. It adds to the suspense. The next book I read is The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna, and this book was good. It wasn't, I personally think that it wasn't her best work. I really like The Four Winds. Like, that's my favorite Kristen Hanna book so far. Granted, I've only read 5 of her books, but so far The Four Winds is my favorite. I did like that this book kind of gave me perspective on like what the people who were living through World War II were going through. I did learn a lot because I'm a huge fan of like historical fiction, and I really enjoyed the movie The Pianist because, like I said, it puts things into perspective because I didn't grow up then, obviously, so knowing like what these people went through during the Holocaust and World War II was really cool. So I mean, it wasn't cool, but it's fascinating to learn about, if you're catching my drift. So 4 stars. The next book I read, I pre-ordered so that I could read it when it came out, and that is The Final Girl Support Group by Grady Hendrix. I don't know what it was, but I felt like this book had a lot of potential and it just kind of flopped. Like, it just was so, like, I finished it, and I know some people couldn't even finish it. It wasn't like super boring, but like I felt like nothing really ever happened. Like, I can't even tell you what this book is about descriptively because I just feel like it was kind of boring and it's not going to stick with me. I do know that it follows a bunch of women who I guess are like in their 30s or 40s, and they survived some tragic event and that made them a final girl, and I don't know, it was just meh. I gave it 3.5 stars. The next book I read is The Push by Ashley Adrian or Audrine, I don't know. This book was really, really good. It wasn't a favorite. I did give it 5 stars, but it's not like a favorite. I know that a lot of people put this in like their favorites of 2021 like shelf on Goodreads, and I didn't add this to mine because it wasn't like, I feel like it's not a favorite of mine, but I did give it 5 stars. I don't know if that makes any sense, but this book is a really good book. I will say, if you're going through something and you're not prepared emotionally and mentally to read a book with a lot of different triggers, I guess. Like, this book is about a woman who is pregnant with a little girl, and when she's born she feels like she's not, like, she feels like there's something wrong with her, and as she gets older the little girl like will do things here and there where she's like, that's not normal, and then she gets pregnant with a little boy and she knows that there's something not right with her daughter because she has a way different connection with her son, one that she knows a mother should have with her child. And it's a really good book. It's written as if her husband or ex-husband was reading it. I don't know how to explain it, but yeah, good book. I gave it 5 stars. The next book I read, I wanted a light-hearted, cute, flirty, funny book, so I picked up The Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren. Loved this book. I read it in one day. I didn't plan on reading it in one day, but I couldn't put it down. It was super fun, super cute. I liked it a lot. I spent the majority of this book drooling over Ethan. I thought he was such a fun character, and I feel like if he was a real character I probably would find him attractive based off the way that he was described. I don't know. I just really love this book and I can't wait to read more Christina Lauren. I gave this book 5 stars. I don't remember if I said that. Also, I added this book to my favorite reads in 2021 shelf on Goodreads because I really, really, really enjoyed this book. But this book follows Olive Torres. She's a twin. Her sister Amy is getting married. It basically starts out at the wedding or the reception, and Olive is allergic to shellfish, and Ethan, the groom's brother, doesn't like to eat at buffets because he gets grossed out. So they are the only 2 people that don't eat the food at the reception, or they eat something else, because the food at the reception is fish of some sort and it's like buffet style. Anyways, every single person gets some sort of food poisoning, and so Amy doesn't want to waste her honeymoon because she's like a super like discounting kind of girl who tries to get things for free if she can, and she got her honeymoon pretty much for free or like a discount or whatever, and there there was no refunds and no like rescheduling. So she sends her sister and the groom sends his brother, and Olive and Ethan do not get along at all. So it's a hate to love romance. It's my favorite kind of romance. I love reading hate to love romance, and they end up falling in love. Obviously, it's kind of a given when you say hate to love romance, but anyways, it's just really, really cute, and it's definitely a book that you have to pick up. If you haven't read it yet, I highly, highly suggest reading it. I loved it. Next, I read What Comes After by Joanne Tompkins. I love reading books that take place in Washington because I live in Washington. This book was good. I gave it 4 stars. This book follows a couple different perspectives. So we have Isaac, who's a father. His son has been missing for, I want to say, 2 days. Daniel is Isaac's son. Daniel's been missing for 2 days. Daniel's best friend Jonah ends up killing himself 2 days after Daniel went missing and leaving a suicide note saying that he murdered Daniel. And so we kind of go off Isaac's perspective of the whole situation. Then we have Jonah leaving letters the day of his death. And then we also follow Evangeline, and she was friends with the boys, and she's pregnant, and she ends up living with Isaac. He pretty much takes her in because he doesn't want a pregnant teenager homeless. So he takes her in, and I just adore Isaac. I think he's a fantastic father figure, and I really loved reading his perspective or point of view or whatever. Anyways, so we kind of go from Isaac's perspective to Evangeline's perspective to Jonah's perspective of his notes on the day that he died, and it's just a really good story. I really enjoyed it a lot. This is Joanne Tompkins' first and only book, and I will read any other books that she has because I just really, really loved her writing style, and I just enjoyed it a lot. So I gave it 4 stars. The next book I read is The Last Time I Lied by Riley Sager. I really, really liked this book a lot. I think this is my favorite Riley Sager book so far. I still have to read Lock Every Door and Home Before Dark, but so far I think this is my favorite Riley Sager book. I do think it should be called Two Truths and a Lie because that game was brought up more times than the phrase The Last Time I Lied. I don't know. Any whoosies. This book follows Emma. She went to camp, I want to say it was 15 years ago, and was friends with multiple girls that were in her cabin called Vivian, Natalie, and Allison. And while she's there, they go missing and they were never found, and so they shut down camp. Now 15 years later, Camp Nightingale, that's what it's called, is opening back up, and she's asked to be a camp counselor, and so she asked to stay in the cabin that she stayed in 15 years prior. So she's put in the cabin, and the 3 people that were staying with her in that cabin, Sasha, Crystal, and Miranda, they go missing as well. So she has to figure out why all these people that she stays in the cabin with go missing, blah blah blah. There's a lot more that goes into the story. I don't want to give it all away. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend starting your Riley Sager journey with this book because this is his best work so far. I don't know if I said, but I gave that book 5 stars, and I added it to my favorite reads in 2021 shelf on Goodreads. The next book I read is another Riley Sager. I read 3 Riley Sagers this month because I'm just really enjoying his books. This one is Final Girls, and this one was good. I just went into it thinking about Grady Hendrix' Final Girl support group, and because of that, this one was 100% better, but because of that, I was a little scared to read it. It was good. It wasn't my favorite. I gave it 4 stars, but essentially this book is like pretty much the same as the other one. This book follows Quincy. Love that name. And she 10 years ago suffered a tragic event making her a final girl, and she reaches out to a couple other final girls, which are Samantha and Lisa. She ends up not being able to contact Samantha because she like fell off the face of the earth. Like they cannot find her, and they suspect that Samantha wants to keep it that way so that she can have her privacy, because even years later she's still being called Samantha the final girl, and Samantha just wants her own life. And it also follows follows Lisa, who was the first final girl, and she is found dead. They don't know if it was a suicide or a murder, and so basically we spend this book trying to find out who killed Lisa, or if she killed herself, because it's kind of inconclusive when they do the autopsy. Anyways, good book. I enjoyed it. Wasn't my favorite Riley Sager, but I still gave it 4 stars. The next book I read is The Crown, which is book 5 in the Selection series. All I'm going to say is I'm glad to be done with this series. I enjoyed the first 3 books, and then book 4 and 5 I felt like could have been left out of the series, but because this was the last book in the series, I felt like just finishing it out. It was just kind of bleh. I gave it 4 stars because it wasn't terrible, and like it was a fun, easy read because it was less than 300 pages, but I'm just glad to be done with the series at this point. So 4 stars. And the last book I read in July was the perfect book to end my month with. It was my first Colleen Hoover, and that is It Ends With Us. Wow. I don't even know what to say about this book. Like, I spent the first half of this book completely in love with Ryle, and then I spent the second half of this book with my heart ripped out of my chest and being stomped on in front of me. Like, what? This book follows Ryle and Lily. It's all Lily's perspective, but Lily's father died and she is asked to give his eulogy at his funeral, but Lily's dad was very, very abusive to her mom, so she didn't have anything to say, so she went up to the podium and just stood there because she didn't have anything good to say about him. And so it was a big fiasco at the funeral, and Lily wants to go to the rooftop of a building to just sit in peace and just reflect, and she can't do that at her apartment, so she finds a random apartment where they have rooftop access, and that's where she meets Ryle, a hot neurosurgeon, and so basically they hit it off right away. Ryle wants to sleep with her as like a one-night stand. Lily's like, no, I have class, blah blah blah. Anyways, they end up dating, then they get married, and it's the events that take place within their relationship and marriage that are just like, whoa. It's a really good book. I gave it 5 stars. I cannot wait to read more Colleen Hoover because holy shit, this book was so freaking good. I also added this book to my favorite reads in 2021 shelf on Goodreads, and I'm gonna do a whole video at the end of the year with all the books that I've added into that shelf, but I think like this is like one of my new favorite books. This book was so intense, so wild, very emotionally draining, but also not being able to put this book down because you want to know what happens. I read this book very, very fast because I was just like, could not stop thinking about it when I wasn't reading it. So yeah, really, really, really good book. So those were all the books I read in July. I had a fantastic reading month. I'm really, really happy with all the books I read. And yeah, so thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, give me a thumbs up, leave a comment letting me know all the books that you read in July and what were your favorites. And I will see you in my next video. Okay, bye.